We had the wonderful Tony Abbott, who promised Australia that there'd be no carbon tax, and people voted for him in droves. But then we had former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who came into his career waving lumps of coal around to great applause, but ended up adopting net zero policies with almost as much zeal as Labor. We now have Australia bowing and scraping at the COP conferences and all these climate talk fests, and Australians are sitting there wondering why, because they didn't vote for it. Now, you rightly said in your article, and I quote, "As Australians, we deserve a government that anticipates and tackles challenges, not one that reacts long after the fact," end quote. And it's a good quote there. But voters for the two major parties, they're looking for some kind of assurance that when they vote for something, they will get it. What would you say to Liberal Party voters?
I would say to them that, there's a lot of people who share the frustrations, particularly with the end of the last government, and I think you could see that in the election result. I don't think there's anyone in the Liberal Party who says that the end of that government was particularly dignified for the Liberal Party. But what needs to be happening is the Liberal Party at the next election needs to be very clear. I'm very encouraged by what Peter Dutton has said about nuclear power and small modular reactors, and the energy debate is starting to pick up in that space. And I think a lot of people would like to see the Liberal Party at the next election have a very clear energy policy that outlines a lot of these challenges. I don't think there's many Australians who think and expect their government to carbon tax our way into changing the weather. Anyone who has a legitimate concern about climate change, and there's people in the community who do have that concern, it has to be, the idea that Australia is going to handicap itself whilst the rest of the world's building coal-fired power stations and nuclear-fired power stations, I think's electoral madness. It's madness for our country. And I think the Liberal Party, if it wants to have a good, strong chance at the next election, needs to start articulating that energy discussion better. And for rank-and-file people out there who are interested in politics and maybe even voted and supported the Liberal Party all their life, and they were particularly disappointed in the end of the last government and the energy policies that were there, I would say there's a very simple equation to all of this. 60 years ago, there was about 2 million voters on the voting rolls in New South Wales, and the Labor Party and New South Wales Liberal Party, just in New South Wales alone, had about 100,000 members each. Now there's about 5.5 million people who are enrolled voters in New South Wales, and the publicly available numbers tell us that both of them are struggling to get 20,000 members in both of these parties. So I think it's a matter of also people out there in the community joining political parties and joining your party of choice and getting in there and doing it. I think Tony Abbott said at the CPAC conference recently, your political party of choice will be far better off with you in it than with you out of it. And that's a big part of the problem.
Well, I often hear people say things like, oh, conservatism is dying, no one's interested. But I think they're wrong. I think what happened is conservatism became green left persuasion, and it stopped being conservative politics anymore. I mean, we see a lot of love out there in the community for figures like Alex Antic, for people like Tony Abbott, for, even the Craig Kellys of the world, and especially Jacinta Price at the last referendum. They were immensely popular, and that shows that the public is still there. They still value these principles. They just need somebody to stand up and actually show them that those values still matter.